Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Carrot Poker Podcast with me, Pete, aka Carroters. Today I've got a hand for you from the corner, in the latest episode, number 9, I believe, of Hands from the Corner, which is a fairly interesting spot actually, where we get to play jacks post flop on a kind of worsening board. So it should be pretty interesting. It's posted by one of our kind of long-term members, I guess he is now, who's had some success lately. So congratulations to the member who posted this hand. He also posted a graph recently that just showed or maybe not a graph, but like a BB per 100 that was like really good and really impressive. So really good news actually in the corner, in Carrot Corner recently. We've had like several members who have just like started to crush basically, and like everyone's working together really well. We've had a lot of interesting threads and just like loads of discussion. Students are arranging like private threat and private sweats and stuff like that, and all working together and harmoniously. So it just shows you the power of community. You know, you get everybody under the one roof, you know, coached by the same coach, the same theory, and they all sort of work together and learning that theory, you know, reading the Grounders Manual, working on the homework that they're given individually together, and just like the power of community really and causing success in online poker today. Like it is still possible to beat like 25 NL, 50 NL, 100 NL with a bit of work. You've just got to grind your way up, have discipline, work on the mental game, and work with others and get coached by the right people. And you know, it's very possible. Just got to have the right approach to it. Like most people that try to become successful poker players these days fail not because they're not innately capable of it, but because they just take all the wrong approaches and don't get the right help and support. Anyway, so in this hand, this is a 25 no limit hand from a US player who plays on Merge. It's a 5-handed spot where Hero is in the hijack, and in the hand history converter. The converted hand history, rather, will describe this as under the gun. I don't like to use the word under the gun to talk about under the gun 5-handed. I just think it's misleading. I think it's much better, and indeed the approach I recommend in the Grounders Manual is that you just have a uniform tag for every position on the table, regardless of how many people are actually there. So under the gun will only ever refer to 3 seats from the button, i.e. the 6 max game, the first seat to act when it's actually 6-handed. If you're 5-handed, we're going to call that seat hijack. So Hero's in the hijack for our purposes, even though it says under the gun in the replay or whatever. Hero raises to 75 cents in a 10-25 game with Jack of Diamonds, Jack of Spades. So far so good. Let's just scan ahead and see who is at the table, because if there are any huge fish or whatever, we might want to increase our sizing, or if we've got like 3 massive 3-betters, we might want to decrease our sizing. We have a 26-7 kind of passive fish over 57 hands in the cutoff. The button is 17-9 over 812 hands, so like a complete tight passive net over a reliable sample. Not every day you see that with a 3% 3-bet, and I'm inclined to believe that that's accurate for a 17-9 over that sample. Small blind is a 2015 3-bet 1%, and big blind is a 23-17 with a 5% 3-bet. And these are all like reasonably big samples. It just goes to show, like, this table, there is just no one 3-betting at all, and so Hero should considerably open up his hijack range. 3x will suffice, that'll be fine sizing, but Hero should feel like he can open many hands in hijack that he wouldn't normally, because he's just getting 3-bets so infrequently. Like, you could even open like 6-5 suited here, given how tight people are. You could open like ace-9 off and things like that and definitely get away with it. I think one mistake people make in this spot with such a tame table ahead is that they don't actually go ahead and change their game based on the fact that they're just not getting messed with at all. You definitely want to open wider in this spot. So anyway, what happens is it cutoff calls, who's a 26-7, so he's like the fishy looking player over 57 hands, 3-bet 0, AF 2.2 aggression factor. I wouldn't worry about that too much over 57 hands. I'd assume that 26-7, you know, using VPIP and PFR as by far the most reliable indicators over a 57 hand sample, I just assume this is like a very passive fish who's unlikely to be bluff raising any streets at all. And so we can just play a game of like bet fold, bet fold, bet fold all the time, just constantly bet folding basically, on most streets for value with any kind of marginal 1-pair hand. He may or may not be stationary, we don't know that yet, but we can pretty much say it's very unlikely he'll be bluffy. So what happens on the flop then? We go heads up to the flop, all the blinds fold, as we'd expect since they're nits. That's the other good thing, we get the fish to ourselves more often when we just have nits at the table. Flop comes 10 of diamonds, 5 of diamonds, 2 of diamonds, so we flop a overpair with a jack high flush draw with our jack of diamonds, jack of spades, overpair plus flush draw. So Hero bets 145 and cutoff calls. I think the sizing is pretty normal, pretty fine, to be honest. I mean, cutoff is going to be calling this with like all kinds of random overcards with diamonds, like random ace-x of diamonds, 10x, pocket pair with diamond, pocket pair without diamond, ace-5 with ace of diamonds, you name it, all this kind of stuff. So Hero's going to do best here to just maximise his value early in the hand. He has a very powerful hand here that's going to be best most of the time, especially when he blocks flushes with that Jack of Diamonds and has redraws if villain does have like a set or whatever. That's just really good. And also just having the Jack of Diamonds as one less diamond that the Ace of Diamonds or King of Diamonds draws can actually hit. So that Jack of Diamonds is incredibly valuable here. If anything, I'd go a little bit on the bigger side just to get my value while I still can. Like, this hand is going to deteriorate a lot, and likely when it does, we're still going to be okay and get to showdown when we have the best hand due to how passive villain looks. Again, he's a 26-7, so even if he does, like, if the turn does come out badly, I think we can just check fold like on bad turns and stuff like that as well, or bet, depending on the turn how bad it is. So cutoff calls, the sizing can be a bit bigger on the flop, but it's okay. 145 is fine. Turn pot size is 475 now. And just to check stack sizes, Hero is fully stacked with the cutoff. Cutoff started with half a big blind less than a full starting stack, again confirming that he's a fish. But still, 100 big blind for all our technical purposes. So turns the ace of clubs, so the board now reads 10 of diamonds, 5 of diamonds, deuce of diamonds, ace of clubs. Not really the turn like that we're hoping to see, obviously. Anytime villain has ace-x of diamonds, he now gets there. What can villain have flush draw wise that's not an ace of diamonds? Well, he could have king queen with a diamond, king of diamonds with 3 queens, and queen of diamonds with 3 kings. So you're basically talking about like 6 combos there of those kind of flush draws. Ace-x of diamonds now makes top pair, so is now just completely crushing us. Like, we're drawing dead to the jack of hearts and the jack of clubs basically, which is, I don't like them odds, that's not very good at all. And in terms of other made hands, like pocket 8s, pocket 9s, 10x, like, we don't need to protect against these hands at all when we have Jack of Diamonds, because even if they do have like a low diamond, like 8s with a diamond, we're still completely dominating. So value betting this turn seems a little bit thin here. Like, the only hands we're really getting called by that we're that happy about would be something like a 10 with a diamond, king 10 with a king of diamonds or something, I guess. Queen 10 with a queen of diamonds, that kind of thing. Remember, villain can't have the Jack of Diamonds because we have that. Or maybe we can get called by like king of diamonds, queen of hearts, like that kind of thing. King of diamonds, 9 of hearts if villain's that wide, but he's only got a VPEP of 26, so he shouldn't just have loads of random diamond hands. So I think the best player in this turn is probably to check fold to like a large bet, or check call to a smaller bet. Check calling turn's not ideal against a passive player, so I'd really stay away from that unless villain bets really small. But I would expect this player, when he does have a hand like king of diamonds, queen x or whatever, to be checking back the vast majority of the time based on what we know. So I'm not too afraid of like folding the best hand here. I think the only other real option is going to be like, instead, like, is leading the turn, like betting again, and I think it's just a bit too thin because so many of villain's draws on the flop are ace-x of diamonds and are now top pair, and so many of his pairs on the flop are folding that turn because it scares them, not just, it scares villain as well. It doesn't just, like, it's not just uncomfortable for our hand, it's uncomfortable whenever a villain's got like king 10 of hearts or pocket 7s or like ace or like king 5 or just something that's not going to do well on the ace of clubs turn. So I think if you're going to bet a second time for value, like, the turn would probably be the street to do it on, because it's where you're most likely to get called by like pair plus draw that you're still ahead of, and like king of diamonds x. I just don't think there are enough of those hands relative to the other hands in villain's range that are like ace-x basically, or some slow played monster from the flop or whatever. I think mainly ace-x hands are going to outweigh them, and I think it's going to be ambitious to think that we can get called by worse on the turn often enough to make value betting the best line. And I think that when we checking is relative to value betting very good, because we rarely fold the best hand when we check turn. I think normally when villain bets turn, him being a 26-7 over 57 hands, he's usually just going to have a much better hand than ours, and we're going to be drawing like pretty thin anyway. Like a jack high flush draw with one card to come is not really worth check calling anyway. So if villain's betting mainly hands like ace-x and better on the turn, which I think is a fair read to make based on this player type, I think if he was capable of betting like king of diamonds x on the turn, he would be likely to have less passive stats in the first place, although it's certainly possible that we do check fold the turn sometimes against better hands like king of hearts, queen of diamonds or whatever, but I think it happens rarely enough that it's okay when it does happen. And you know, those hands are just, they have equity against us anyway. Like king of diamonds, queen of hearts is still going to have it's going to have its 8 diamonds to hit. Any king, any queen is going to be good for it as well, and even a jack is and out to a straight. So there's just going to be so many outs that those hands actually have against us. 8 diamonds plus 3 kings and 2 queens, I guess, because we already counted one of the queens. It's 5 is 13 outs plus 2 jacks is 15 outs. So I mean, that's like a lot of equity. Like you're talking like 15 outs with 47 unknown cards still in it, or 46 unknown cards in the deck. That's almost like 33% equity. It's like 32 point something percent equity. That's a lot, and that's like the best case scenario when villain bet. So I think it's clearly a check fold if we check here. I don't think check calling the turn is viable in the slightest. So I think the turn spot's the most interesting spot here. We actually bet the turn for 316 into 475, which I don't really like. I think you're just kind of value owning yourself now. You should really be going into pot control and hope to get to showdown mode on that card. Your hand has just been massively kind of counterfeited and just made it's now a lot worse relative to villain's range than it was on the flop. So you're much better off just check folding turn to reasonable sizes or check calling small fish like bets, I suppose. On the river then is the 5 of spades, so the board now pairs. It reads 10-5 deuce, ace 5. So we still have this underpair, and we now check river, and villain bets half pot. Now I think this is a really obvious fold against a passive player. I just don't see how we could ever bluff catch here. For one, half pot sizing is not super likely to be a bluff from like a weak passive player. It's more likely just to be a value bet, and it's a very typical bet size that this kind of guy would choose for value, in my opinion. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself with exploitative reads that I don't fully know here, but I just think it's way more likely, like value sizing from this player type. An aggro fish might bluff that size sometimes, but I think a passive fish, it's just rarely going to bluff here anyway. Like, what is he going to have to bluff with? It's really just going to be those aforementioned hands like king queen or king 9 or whatever with like a diamond. That's really the only thing that's void of showdown value that needs to bluff here. And it's just not going to have those hands very often, just like we said on the turn. And he's not going to bluff them all the time when he does have them. He's probably going to bluff them rarely based on his player type. So we can't hero call against them. Ace-X for sure could bet this size for value. And bigger hands such as 5x or some kind of monster hand from the flop, like slow played flush or set, which is now a boat or quads or whatnot, or ace 10 even, top two pair could easily bet this sizing. So I just think that going into exploitative mode as we should against the fish and just trying to hand read here, I think like we're definitely just in very bad shape here. Like, sure, we only need 25% equity to call river, but we're not going to make that target, in my opinion, at all. So I think river's a pretty standard fold. So that's my analysis of the hand. Now let's go one step further, like we always do here at Carrot Corner, and look at Hero's thought process, because Hero might actually decide in summary that his play's bad or whatever, and we might be able to credit him for that, for coming to the realization that he should have checked turn, for example, would be like a good example of out-of-game thought process correcting in-game thought process logic, like flawed logic in-game. So let's see what he's got to say and see if we can give him any credit for his thought process, or see if there's more things we can correct about his thought process. That's why it's always good to say what you think about the hand. So he says, first of all, villain folds to 40% flop c-bets, 0% turn. Like, I don't care. And he goes on to even say, I don't think these stats matter too much with this sample size. They don't matter at all. Like, you know nothing. You just know it's like a random passive fish. He's probably kind of, you know, could be slightly stationary, could be fair or fold. We don't really know. We only have 57 hands in villain. Seems to be some sort of fishy player. I don't know. 26-7 is an odd stat to see. Yeah, weak tight fish. He then goes on to say, so I believe that's right. He then says, like, what the blank blank do I label this guy as? Does it really matter? Like, you know how he plays. He's a weak, tight, passive fish. Like, choose any combination of those words. As long as you know what it means, you don't really need to come up with the right, like, actual linguistic tag for the kind of player. It doesn't really matter. You could call him, like, an elephant or a crocodile or whatever the hell. Like, I think Phil Hellmuth wrote a book once. It was an awful book where he compared players to animals. So if that's what you like to do, you could do that, or you could just say weak passive fish. Doesn't really matter as long as you know how to play against a 26-7 c-bet lots of flops. Don't bluff later streets. Isolate him very wide. Expect to fold whenever he raises and you've got a marginal hand. As long as you know that stuff, it doesn't really matter what you call the guy, to be honest. On the flop, standard c-bet, no point in slow playing. Indeed, not just no point in slow playing, but slow playing is horrific. On the turn, gets a little more tricky, says Hero. He definitely could call flop c-bet with ace of diamonds, so he's correctly identified that ace of diamonds is a fairly substantial part of villain's range, which I believe it is. He will also call with top pair on the turn, still not being extremely bothered by the turned ace. Well, you don't know that. I mean, he's a kind of passive fish. Like, he could fold queen 10 on the ace of clubs if he doesn't have a diamond. I agree he'll call when he does have a diamond, but I think that he could fold. And even if he does have a 10 that he would call on the turn, why not just wait till the river to get value from that hand? Because he's undoubtedly not going to call twice too frequently, or at least you can't bet 3 times like overall in the hand. You can't bet turn and river. So why not just check turn and pot control and then like save yourself money when villain has a good hand and bets, and then you can still go for that value bet against 10x on the river. Just because you can get called now on the turn by some weaker hands doesn't make value betting the best line. Like you got to think about the alternative here, which is checking. Now we come to his, he also says, I can't find a reason to check this turn out position. It could give my opponent a free card to check back and draw out. Sure, but there's not that many hands that are drawing live here that you actually beat. We've already said the King X and Queen X, the diamond hands, are like fairly few and far between. And they have so much equity anyway that like they're entitled to call your bet. So I don't love betting turn. Just see if villain had less ace-x. Betting turn for protection would make a lot of sense, but you need to have the best hand more often in order to bet solely for like kind of protection reasons here. So I don't think betting turn is like by far like a terrible play, but I do think it's worse. He then goes on to say, on the river, I shut down here hoping for a check back with the second best hand. Yep, fair enough. You're still going to beat like some kind of like draws that check back basically. He does decide to bet half pot. All I can think of is characters saying, this sizing is never a bluff. You will get a rejection letter saying thank you for your application, but you will not be receiving a call. I'm not sure if I ever said that. Maybe I did say that once in a podcast or something. It sounds a bit too witty for me though. I'm not sure I would come up with something with like that call pun in it. Maybe that's from somewhere else. But yeah, definitely he's already preempted. My student here has preempted my thought process of like this sizing is never a bluff in this kind of player. Yeah. He says, I think worse hands would check back here, especially by this weirdo type villain. I agree, villain is a weirdo, but he's just a passive type player, you know, let him be that. It's great, it's really plus EV for you. Don't be so offended by the fact that he's like an uncommon player type, like it's great. So I think villain's hero's thought process there is very solid on the flop and the river. I think he's just gone slightly wrong on the turn by not realizing how often he actually doesn't have the best hand anymore and how thin a value bet would actually be there and how it's just really plus EV to check fold due to villain's straightforward nature, and that when you're comparing betting the turn, you need to compare it to check folding as an alternative, not just look at it in isolation as checking per se. Like, how good is check folding? Really good, because we save all that money when we're behind and we can fold with a very high degree of accuracy on the turn should villain bet. Okay, that's all for this week, guys. You can see there, if you're watching on YouTube, how to get in touch with me. It's all on screen. admin@carrotcorner.com is my email address. I'm taking on lots of students right now. I'd be thrilled to hear from you guys and work with more of you guys on your game. And check out my website, carrotcorner.com, for more information on my book, my teaching style, my coaching, and everything else. So see you guys in the next podcast. Thank you very much for listening.